Well, shalom, dear friends, and welcome to our Bible study series on the book of Genesis. And today we are going to be in chapter 10, which just a brief glance will show you that this is a genealogy, basically the whole chapter. And I've shared with you before when we came to chapter 5, and it was a genealogy. I explained that usually if I do any kind of pastoral counseling with people regarding how they should study the Bible, one of the things that I encourage people to do is skip over the genealogies, particularly if you're in First and Second Chronicles and some of the material in the books of Kings and Samuel and so forth. A lot of genealogies there, and basically they're just long lists of Hebrew names and pretty meaningless to people. Well, that's what we're approaching today. Um, I do have, when I do these Bible study videos and when I do other formats of Bible study, I have kind of a commitment to do what's usually known as chapter by chapter and verse by verse Bible studies. I want to hit every chapter in the Bible and every verse in the Bible, and even spend some time on every word in the Bible. Sometimes that's a little inconvenient. Most of the Bible study videos and the books that I read are by people who take that chapter by chapter and verse by verse approach. But it does bring us to genealogies, and then there's the question whether we should do them or not. So basically, we're going to do some genealogies. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about prophecy and the role that some of these names have in prophecy. We're also going to be looking at a map when we do it. So the Bible software I'll be using today is a different one that is set up so that I can refer to the Bible text in both English and Hebrew. And then also I can look at a map at the same time. And we can show you where some of these families settled and the possible role that they might play in the future, particularly with regard to history and so forth. So I'll try to bring out some interesting things in this. If you decide that you don't want to do the genealogy, you'll just have to wait for chapter 11 to come out. But if you're brave, I encourage you to stick with this. So let's just do a little bit of kind of background and review. First of all, we are in chapter 10. We have pretty much left the second dispensation, which is the age or era of conscience, where the conscience was the main vehicle that God used to communicate to people. He manifested himself in theologies and Christophanies and things like that. But the Bible didn't begin to be written until the days of the Exodus, which is about 1500 BC. So for 2,500 years, the conscience was the main thing. And just because the Bible is written doesn't mean that God doesn't use the conscience anymore. He definitely does. In fact, the new covenant, as opposed to the old covenant, is mainly about God communicating to us primarily through conscience. Jeremiah 31:31, where it talks about the new covenant. One of the contrasts that the prophet brings out is that under the new covenant, whereas under the old covenant, the law was written on stone tablets and parchment scrolls. But under the terms of the new covenant, the law of God is going to be written on the heart. In other words, God is going to personally communicate to you his will and so forth. So, conscience is still valid. And compared to the old covenant era, it's even more valid now than it was then. And of course, we use the Bible as an objective standard so that we can compare the things that we think God is saying to us. Because we mentioned before, other creatures, not all of them good, Satan, fallen angels, and demons can also communicate to us through conscience. And not so nice people can. Nice people can communicate to us through conscience, and that is usually connected with blessings. So then after the flood of Noah's Ark, we moved to the era of human government, and we really focused on that and gave some examples of human government and the important principles, like the consent of the governed. Our whole spiritual life is about whose government we consent to. Do we consent to God's government and follow him and conform our lives to his will, or do we consent to Satan's government and conform our behavior to his destructive will? And of course, the consequences of the decisions that we make are monumental. That determines where we're going to spend eternity, in heaven with God or in hell, separated from him. We talked about this kind of the Scofield Reference Bible definition of human government, which I think is constructive. And then the Noahic covenant and some of the things that changed under that. Today, we're going to be looking at this map. This is a map of the Middle East. And in the genealogies, of course, the genealogies we'll be studying will be those of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And so this map divides those three sons of Noah into three color areas. The color area that looks kind of yellowish is Shem. The greenish area in the African continent is Ham. And then the red area is Japheth. And this is just a segment of what has become the Japhetic nations of the world. But these are the areas that were populated in the early days of the Bible. So those are the ones that we'll focus on. And then I have a globe that we'll look at when we get to a certain verse of our text for today. So if you're still with me so far, let's go ahead to our text and take a look at Genesis chapter 10. So yeah, we're using Olive Tree Bible software today, which is my all-time favorite one, particularly on my devices, on my iPad, my iPhone. And then we've got a map here that we can zoom in on, or we can make it small or make it big or whatever. So yeah, let's go ahead and start with Genesis 10:1. Now, this is the genealogy of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And the sons born to him, and sons were born to them after the flood, which makes it sound like none of those three sons had any babies aboard the ark. It sounds like it was all after the flood, although I guess it could have happened during when the flood was receding. I don't know how important an issue that is. So the sons of Japheth. So first of all, we're going to be looking at this red area on the map. These are the Japhetic tribes. If you are from Europe, as my family was, you may be a Japhethite, unless you have ancestors in your family that are of Jewish background, and then your ancestors could be living in any of these areas or the New World and things like that. So as I understand it, I've studied a little bit about my family's genealogy, and it appears that my mom's side of the family was Jewish. Her dad was Jewish. He married a Christian gal. My mom was raised as a Christian, but I think there's a little bit of Jewish blood in our family. So the sons of Japheth were Gomer. This is not Gomer Pyle, for those of you who are old enough to remember the Gomer Pyle USMC series, which was a offshoot, what do you call it? A sequel of the Andy Griffith Show. Gomer was one of the, anyway, let's not talk about Gomer. Gomer is right here in this area of Japheth. And this area that I'm encircling with my palm, my electronic palm, is modern day Turkey. In biblical times, it was known as Asia Minor, but this is modern day Turkey. So Gomer's descendants, Gomer's the Gomer branch of the family tree settled around here. Then we've got Magog or Magog in English, and Magog is right here. Now, Magog is critical. Well, let me do the rest of the names, and then I'll tell why it's critical. We've got Madai, which is over here, kind of to the east, Madai. And I am guessing that Madai were the ancestors of the Medes, like the Medes and Persians, who got together and established an empire that defeated Babylon. Then you've got Yavan. Now, Yavan is kind of interesting here because Yavan is the Hebrew word for Greece or the Greek people. And look where Yavan is located here. See, you would think it would be over here in the Greek peninsula, but Yavan is located here in the islands, the Aegean Islands off the coast of Asia Minor. Back in 2003 or 4, I believe it was, we took a group of pilgrims to Greece, first of all, to follow the route of the Apostle Paul and Silas, their second missionary journey, and parts of the third missionary journey as well throughout Greece. And then we got on a cruise ship at Athens, and we sailed across the Aegean through some of these islands, visited some of these islands. They are just gorgeous. The Aegean Sea is so beautiful. The water is so clear, and just the color of it is wonderful. So we sailed throughout these islands, and one of the things that we learned is that in ancient times, Greece laid claim to these islands. You would think they would be Turkish islands because they're closer to Turkey than they are to Greece, but the Greeks laid claim to them. And then the Greeks and the Persians fought over the, I guess it would be the west coast of Asia Minor. And so for many centuries, Greece ruled the like the western coast of Turkey. And then the Persians and the Greeks fought back and forth, and eventually the Greeks won. So it may have been at that point, the Greek conquest of Persia, that when Greece started to lay claim to these territories. So it was kind of a battleground between the Greeks and the Persians. Of course, we learn in Daniel chapter 2, chapter 7, chapter 8, probably a little bit after that also, we learn about the sequence of empires that oppressed the nation of Israel, the Jewish people, in the times of the Gentiles. Egypt, the days of the Exodus. Assyria, the Assyrian Empire, the Babylonian Empire in the days of Daniel and King Nebuchadnezzar there. Then you've got the Medes and the Persians. An interesting story there, an interesting relationship with Israel. When the king of the Medo-Persian Empire, in our English Bibles, his name is Ahasuerus or Ahasuerus in English. He marries a Jewish girl named Esther. Hadassah is her Hebrew name. And they have a child named Cyrus. And Cyrus, this half-Jewish kid, turns out to be the next Medo-Persian emperor. And he is one that sends them back to the Holy Land to rebuild their country, their capital city, and their temple. So then the Persians are defeated by the Greeks. The Romans defeat the Greeks after that. And then Daniel also talks about a last days empire that will be related to this sequence, this series of foreign empires. So that's one of the things we want to talk about. So Yavan is interesting. Then Tuval is over here. Here's Tuval, kind of right in the middle. We got Meshech right here. There's a one of Daniel's three friends is named Meshach. By the Babylonians name him Meshach. Their Hebrew names were Hananiah, Azariah, and what was the other one? Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. And Daniel is called Belshazzar in that book. So here's Meshach, but this is, way before Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's time. So Meshach is an important name. And then Tiras, I think I found that. Yeah, here's Tiras up here, kind of the north of Yavan. So let's talk about those names. In Ezekiel 37 and 38, there is a prophecy about what appears to be a last days war that is fought by an alliance of nations and people groups and cultures that will come against Israel to destroy her. And some of the names that are mentioned there are Gog and Magog. Gog seems to be a person's name there, and Magog in Hebrew means from Gog. So still, the name that we're given here in Genesis 10 is Magog. So Gog may be a leader out of Magog. And then you've got Meshach and Tuval, and I think Togarma might be mentioned there. But anyway, this map kind of shows us where the enemies of Israel will come from, and it would be modern day Turkey, which is kind of interesting because when we visited Greece and Turkey also, we visited Ephesus in Turkey. We were told that Turkey was had a lot of Christians in it, and the Christians were respected and given all kinds of religious freedom and stuff like that. And the Turkish government just welcomed, our touring groups, loved to have us come there. But some of the Christians that we met there said that Christians were being persecuted and that they did not have the kind of religious freedoms that the government was talking about. Well, in more recent times, and I'm talking about just within the last few years, say from, the year 2020, and moving forward in time, Turkey has gotten very radical as far as Islam is concerned. It used to be a secular nation, which welcomed all different races and religious groups. Now it's a much more religious nation, and are persecuting persecuting the Christians to a great extent. I heard just the other day that Armenia was being invaded by what is it? The modern is it Kazakhstan? I may have the wrong nation there, but anyway, it's like the Muslims are committing genocide against the Christians who live in Armenia, which is a very old Christian kind of stronghold, and it is being conquered today. So this is where the main players of the Ezekiel 37 and 38 war, the Gog and Magog war, it's usually called, that's where they will be coming from. There are some popular books. I'm not going to mention any authors' names because I don't want to badmouth anybody. But there is speculation that Gog and Magog are references to Russia, and that Meshach is kind of an ancient word for Moscow, and Tubal is what? Tublensk or something like that. But according to this map, that's not really where they're going to come from. Okay, verse 3. The sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarma. Ashkenaz is here, Most Jewish people are categorized as either Ashkenazic Jews or Sephardic Jews. Sephardic is Sephard is the Hebrew word for Spain. Ashkenaz mainly refers to Jewish people who were exiled centuries ago, millennia ago, into European nations like Germany and Poland and Russia, places like that, are known as the Ashkenazi Jews. And there are some subtle differences in their language, like I have prayer books, Sidurim, that are Ashkenazi and Sephardic, and the language is a little bit different. The modern state of Israel has kind of adopted the Sephardic approach to language and culture and things like that. So Sephardic is thought to be kind of Middle Eastern, but here's Ashkenaz. And then the sons of Ashkenaz, Rifchat. I don't know how many of these. Here's Rifchat and Togarma. The sons of Yavan. Remember Yavan. This could be the Greeks here. Were Elisha, Tarshish. On our map, where do we have Tarshish? Over here on the west, like in the, what is this? No, this is the Ionian Sea. Tarshish over here, off the west coast of Italy. I have heard also that Tarshish was an ancient kind of Hebrew term. This may be a Greek term. Anyway, that it might be a term referring to Spain, although I already mentioned that the standard Hebrew word for Spain is Sephardic. Kittim. Let's see, where do we have the Kittim? Are they on our map here? Kittim is pointing to the island of Cyprus. I believe this is the island of Crete. This is Cyprus here. Elisha is pointed here, and Kittim here. I have also heard that Kittim is a reference that later day Jews, like during the time of Jesus, this was a term that they used for the Romans. Now, that may have been because the Romans came from Italy, came from Rome, and may have used the island of Cyprus as kind of a launching assembly area and a launching pad. Interestingly enough, after the Holocaust in World War II, a lot of Jewish people who didn't have homes to return to wanted to come to the Holy Land, but they had to come first to Cyprus because there were immigration quotas and limitations in what was then called Palestine. It wasn't a state yet, or it wasn't, they had not declared their nationhood yet. And a lot of these Holocaust survivors were put in like barbed wire camps here, waiting to be processed and hoping to get into Israel. There's a movie from, I think it's probably back in the 60s, called Exodus with Paul Newman, and it's got the famous theme song Exodus that I think Pat Boone wrote the words to it. Anyway, it's the story of people, of Paul Newman's character, and what was his name? Was it Judah ben Canaan? I don't think that was his name. Anyway, that was his dad's name. Paul Newman's character commandeers this ship. It looks like a cargo ship or something, and puts a lot of people from Cyprus on it and takes them over to the Promised Land and lands them there. But there was a lot of smuggling and stuff going on as the Jewish people were trying to get to the Promised Land after 2,000 years of exile. From these coastland peoples of the Gentiles were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families, into their nations. And the language groups, the commonality of language groups, is one of the motives for settling together in common places. And when we get to chapter 11, we'll talk about the Tower of Babel, where the kind of universal human language, I think it was Hebrew, but there are different viewpoints on that. But the common language of all the peoples was confused. So some people spoke one dialect, others spoke another dialect. And that caused the building of the Tower of Babel and, that kingdom to cease, and people kind of spread out over the earth and settled in different areas and established different cultures and so forth. So, yeah, everyone according to his language, according to their families, into their nations. The sons of Ham. So we've been talking about Japhet. Now we're going to talk about Ham. And Ham's descendants are here in green. So the northeastern part of the African continent is dedicated to Ham. So let's see who some of these people were. They were Cush. So if we look here, here's the Nile River flowing north through Egypt. Mitzrayim is the Hebrew name for Egypt. So this area is Egypt, and Cush is right below it. I'm not sure exactly where modern day Ethiopia is on this map. It might be right there. It might be right there for Cush, but Cush is the Hebrew word for, what later became Ethiopia. And a lot of English Bibles just go ahead and translate Cush as Ethiopians. Like in, what was it, Acts chapter 9, where Philip encounters the Ethiopian eunuch who was on his way on a mission from Queen Candace from this territory here. Anyway, Cush is south of Mitzrayim, south of Egypt. Then we've got Seba, and down here in the lower part of the Red Sea is Seba on the west side, and Sheba or Sheba in Hebrew on the east side. And these were very wealthy and prosperous areas. A lot of gold and silver and precious metals and things like that came from these territories. So the Queen of Sheba is the one who came to visit Solomon up here in Israel in the days of Solomon and was so impressed. And there's even a tradition that while she was visiting with Solomon, he left her with a very special and unique gift, and that was a child that she left there pregnant. And because Solomon was basically the king of that part of the world, she believed that her son was a rightful heir to the throne, and that may have caused some interesting political things. But there's still traditions in that part of the world that many generations of descendants will eventually rule. And yeah, so this visit of the Ethiopian eunuch in the days of the book of Acts may have had something to do with that, with the Shebaites. He was a Ethiopian or a Cushite, having something to do with it. There's also kind of an interesting theory, and I'm trying to think of the name of the author of the book about where the temple was located. Bob Cornuke is his name. Wrote a book about where the temple was probably located. I think he's right about that it was south of the modern day Temple Mount in the old city of David. But he also has a theory about where the Ark of the Covenant is hidden, and it's somewhere down south of Egypt. And so, when Messiah, Yeshua, returns, there will, if that's where the Ark of the Covenant is hidden, then it might well be returned to Israel to take its rightful place in the Holy of Holies in the millennial temple. Another theory is that it is hidden underground beneath the Garden Tomb. And the archaeologist who made the biggest name for himself with that theory is Ron Wyatt. I think he died back in the mid 80s, but did a lot of digging and research around the Garden Tomb and claimed that he found it, that he had seen it with his own eyes. But he doesn't have any pictures of it, and the Israeli government will not allow any further digging there for one reason or another, probably political. So yeah, we've got Seba. Then we've got Havilah. Let's see if I can find Havilah on it. Havilah is right here. And where that becomes interesting is when the location of the Garden of Eden is described, there are four rivers that come out of it. One is the Pishon, one is the Gihon, one is the Tigris, and one is the Euphrates. And one of those rivers, and I think it's the Gihon, said that it ran through Havilah. So this is where Havilah was. And I should say, these are theologians' best guesses, and what would it be? Cartographers' best guesses as to where, anthropologists, their best guesses as to where these places are. They really should have a lot of question marks on some of these. Some of them are absolute, but some of them should probably have question marks. So this could be an area where the original Garden of Eden came about. But this guy named Havilah, and the region is known after him, may have been where the, one of those original four rivers from the Garden of Eden flowed. Then we've got Savta, Ra'amah, Savtecha, and the sons of Ramah were Sheba and Dedan. Where is Dedan? Oh, I'm not seeing it right offhand. Oh, here's another Havilah. So that would be another theory of where Havilah comes from. Although this one is in yellow, so that there might be a Havilah in the descendants, among the descendants of Shem, who's depicted in the yellow. So, okay, I'm not seeing Dedan. Okay, don't want to spend a lot of time on that. Cush begot Nimrod. Now, Nimrod is kind of an interesting person in history. I'm not sure how many times he's mentioned in the Bible, but this is pretty much, here in Genesis 10, this is pretty much the whole story that the Bible gives us of Nimrod. So what do we learn about him? Cush begot Nimrod, and Cush, of course, was the son of Ham. No, that was Canaan. So Cush, upon whom the curse was spoken. Cush, who is Ethiopia, sorry about that, begot Nimrod. Nimrod comes from a root word, yarad, which means to rebel or to kind of put down, like put down rulers or something like that. But it basically means rebellion. His name means rebellion. He begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth, which could be talking about his physical strength, maybe weaponry that he developed to have that kind of power. It might also be a reference to influence, like political influence, cultural influence. He might be what do they call them? Influencers, like social media influencers. He may have been a biblical era social influencer on the earth, kind of beyond, where he settled. And we'll talk about the places where he settled in a few minutes here. But he seems to have more power and influence than other people of his generation. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. So animals have been introduced to the human diet. So he may have, gotten in on the ground floor of that. and took people on safaris and provided meat for people's diets as they began to desire that more and more. Mighty hunter before the Lord. Verse 9 here, let me see what the preposition is. Lifane Adonai. He was a mighty hunter, a tzayid, which can be like a hunter or a fisherman. Lifane, the sacred name of God. I'll just say Adonai today. Before Adonai, which could mean like in the presence of the Lord and with the Lord's approval. But Lifane Adonai can also mean like getting in God's face and challenging God's own authority. So depending on what you think of Nimrod might influence what you think it means to be a hunter before the Lord. Some have said that he was not only a hunter of animals, but he was a hunter of human beings. He was like a bounty hunter. He was an enforcer, a law enforcer, maybe of God's law, maybe of his own law. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. And the beginning of his kingdom, so he had a kingdom. He was a king. He established a kingdom, was Bavel. So let's go over to our map here. And Bavel is the Hebrew word for Babylon. And here on the Euphrates River is where Babylon was located. The Tower of Babel, Bavel, also draws its name from this location. Then we've got Erech, which is right down the river. We've got Achad, which is right here on the Tigris. And Calne, which is up here on the Tigris. And then there's Nineveh, which was the Assyrian capital. So all these places took place in the like on the plain, the land of Shinar. And here is Shinar on our map, but notice it's not in yellow, but it's in green. So Nimrod obviously was a descendant of Ham. And so he kind of went out of his territory, kind of to the east, to the Tigris and Euphrates, which is a very good place to settle. I mean, you got serious desert here, kind of between there and the Promised Land. And this is the Fertile Triangle. This is, what do they call it? Mesopotamia, between the two rivers. Very fertile land, a great place to do for agriculture, things like that. But this seems to be a Hamite influence in the land of the Shemites. From that land, he went to Assyria and built Nineveh. So here's Nineveh, the capital of Assyria. So, nowadays, Iraq is kind of right here, and Syria is kind of to the north and northwest of Iraq. And then you've got over here would be Iran. So so Nimrod is building all around the Fertile Crescent area. Nineveh would eventually become the capital of Assyria. There is no Assyria anymore. The closest we come nowadays is Syria, or in Hebrew it's Aram. And then Calne, which is just downriver from Nineveh. In the land of Shinar. From that land, he went to Assyria and built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Ir, and Calais. This is Calais. I did not point out Kalna. I misrepresented Kalna, and I don't know where that is. It may not be on this map. I don't see it. Don't want to waste a lot of time on it. And also Rezin, another city between Nineveh and Calais. That is the principal city. And then it just continues with the genealogy. So let me pause here at verse 13 and talk. That's the historical stuff we know about Nimrod, and from that we could draw the conclusion that he was a good guy. that he was an innovator, a builder. He was a powerful and influential person in the world in those days, or we could believe that he was a rebel. Well, there is a tradition that goes along with Nimrod based on some truthful facts of history and some so-called facts of history that may be kind of contrived and maybe more in the category of fables and mythology. There's a pretty famous book by a man named Alexander Hislop, I believe, Hislop. He wrote a book called Two Babylons, and in that book, he provides a lot of the tradition about Nimrod, and that Nimrod was not only a political leader and not only a kind of a social influencer, but he was also a religious leader. So he founded his own religion. We'll call it the Satanic religion. Actually, I think it was referred to as the Babylonian religion. It involved himself as like the incarnate creator God, and then his wife's name was Semiramis, and she was some kind of she was like the queen of heaven, kind of a part human, part divine being, and they gave birth to a son named Tammuz, and I guess Tammuz died, but then he rose from the dead, so you can see the similarities coming out here. But anyway, according to this tradition, Nimrod was the founder of this religion. And of course, it spawned the Baals, Baals, from the Bible, the Asherahs, all of the like Canaanite religions and so forth. By the way, on our map, here's Canaan living in the promised land, in the days of Genesis 10. And it was the Canaanites that were living in the land when Abraham came there. And then it was the Canaanites that were defeated by Joshua and Caleb and that generation. Okay, continuing with the story of Nimrod. So, there was a religion behind this. And when we get to chapter 11 and talk about the Tower of Babel, we'll talk about that building as like a worship center, an ancient worship center that was either going to be really tall and reach to heaven, or it was just going to be a kind of a high place where people could go and, worship probably the god Nimrod and his family of divine beings. We do know historically that the center of this cultic religion, whether Nimrod started it or somebody else did, was Babylon. And so the Babylonian religion was there in Babylon for many centuries until the time of the Medes and the Persians. And when they conquered Babylon, this religion moved, and they moved to a place up here called Pergamum. It's one of the 7 churches of the book of Revelation, and I think there's even a reference in Revelation to the seat of Satan, or where Satan rules. So the Babylonian religion in the days of the Medes and the Persians moved here, but then in the days of the Romans, it moved to Rome and eventually evolved into the Roman Catholic Church. Now, as you can imagine, this tradition that I shared with you is not popular with the Roman Catholics. But if you compare the ancient Babylonian religion and some of the aspects of Roman Catholicism, you can see some connections there. The part about the Babylonian religion being in Babylon and then moving to Pergamum and then moving to Rome is historically true. That can be proven, that can be documented pretty well. So I guess that's all I'm going to say about Nimrod. If you don't like what's going on in the world, you may have a tendency to blame Nimrod for it and say, hey, all this evil that's going on in the world dates back to before the Tower of Babel. and it may well be that way. But I'm going to let you come to your own conclusions about that. Then Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim, we pointed out before on our map, is right here. That's Egypt. That's the Hebrew word for Egypt. It's always called Mitzrayim, never called Egypt. It might be in the New Testament, but in the Old Testament, it's called Mitzrayim. Ludim. Let's see, where is Lud? I'm not going to look. Oh, the Ludim over here. And so this is going to be Libya. Libya, I think, starts right about here. So this is the ancient Libyans. Then we've got the Anamim, the Lachavim, and the Nephtuchim. Then we've got the Patrushim. Some of these are going to be listed here. Here's Patrushim. They're just going to be scattered all over. Naphtutim, Patrushim, the Kasluchim, from which came the Palishtim, the Philistines. So this one is interesting, the Kalushim. Let's see if we can find the Kalushim on here. There are different theories about where the Palestinians came from, or the Philistines. And I'm not seeing it on the map here, maybe because it's debated. Some people say they came from Crete. Some say they came from Cyprus. Some say they came from like Egypt. Lots of different theories about where the Palestine came from. And the interesting, of course, we all know about the Philistines in the days of the conquest, in the days of the judges, in the days of King David. King David seems to be the one that kind of completely wiped out the Philistines. So these claims of the modern day Palestinians to have descended from the ancient biblical Philistines, this is not true. They were totally wiped out by the Israelis. It took them longer than it should have, but there are no descendants of the ancient Philistines around anymore. That was kind of a genocide ordered by God. And the Kaphtorim. Where's the Kaphtorim? You see him anywhere? Kaphtorim? I don't want to look anymore. Kaphtorim. Oh, Kaphtorim. Kaphtorim from Crete. So maybe that's where that idea came from. The Philistines came from the Kaphtorim. So yeah, there's the background of the Philistines, where they came from. And the Philistines settled mainly along the Mediterranean coastline. They were seagoing people, great fishermen. One of their gods was Dagon. Dag in the Semitic languages means a fish. So the fish god, Dagon, that we learn about in the days of the judges, I guess it was. Then we've got Canaan, who lives over here in the Promised Land. Canaan begot Sidon, his first. You've heard of Tyre and Sidon up here in modern-day Lebanon. Here's Sidon, his firstborn, and Chet. The Yebusi, Chet, the Yebusi. I don't know if this is saying that hate was the Yebusi. Yebusite is interesting because in the days before King David, the city that became known as Jerusalem, was called Jebus, the ancient city of Jebus, and the people who lived there were the Jebusites. And so when David conquered the city, it was the Jebusites that he was conquering, and then he called it Jerusalem. A lot of people think that it means the year, of course, is the Hebrew word for a city, but the year in Jerusalem is not a city. It's like a banner of peace, shalom, Jerusalem. So it means banner of peace. The Amorites were there, which we encounter in I think the first battle that is fought during the Exodus is with the Amorites. And then the Girgashites, which are mentioned in the Gergesa is mentioned in the New Testament as being up on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee, but I don't know if that's related to this or not. Then you got the Hivite and the Archite and the Sinite. Sinite is interesting because Sina is the Hebrew word for Chinese, but I think that is out of our context here. I don't think this is the origin of the Chinese. The Arvadite, the Zimmerite, and the Hamathite. Afterwards, the families of the Canaanites were dispersed. And the border of the Canaanites was from Sidon as you go toward Gerar. Gerar was one of the cities of the Philistines as far as Gaza. The modern day Gaza Strip in Israel is interesting, and it is along this southwest coastline of southwestern Israel, modern day Israel, the Gaza Strip. It used to be a kind of a mixed settlement of Jews and Palestinians. And it was always kind of an area of conflict. But during the days of Ariel Sharon, when he was the prime minister of Israel, he did a radical thing that was totally out of character for him, and that is he ordered all the Jews to leave Gaza, and he turned it out over to the Palestinians. And this was almost like a sort of like a test case to see if they could govern themselves. I mean, it's still territory that is technically part of the state of Israel, but Sharon just turned it over to the Palestinians, and it has become a hellhole. And it is a it is a kind of a launching pad, a base of operations for the Palestinians to launch missiles into the modern day state of Israel. It is just a horrible. Even the Palestinians living there, they hate living there. The economy is so bad. And when there is conflict, when there are battles between the IDF, which is the Israeli Defense Force, and the Gazans, the terrorists there, the Palestinians, use the civilian populations as human shields. So they know that their lives are not worth much to their leaders. It's a center of radicalism, and basically no Jews are living there anymore. I know there are some places where you visit in Israel. Our favorite guide that we used on most of our trips to Israel is an Israeli. I won't mention his name, but he's a dear friend. And whenever we would go to Bethlehem, which is controlled by the Palestinians now, Bethlehem is it's a southern suburb of Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is controlled by the Israelis. Bethlehem is, although it's technically a part of Israel, it is controlled by the Palestinians. And our guide has told us that if he led us on a tour to Bethlehem in the tour bus for the company that he works for, which is a Jewish company, he might not make it all alive, and we might not either. So what we had to do when we visited Bethlehem was we had to go to the border crossing, the checkpoint between Bethlehem and Jerusalem, get off of our tour bus, cross through the checkpoint, get on a Palestinian tour bus, and let a Palestinian guide take us around Bethlehem. And our guide, our Jewish guide, who was a believer in Yeshua, by the way, really cool guy, great story. His testimony is a great story. But he would not and should not go into Bethlehem because he might not make it out alive. So yeah, that's kind of a little bit of background about these Palestinian-controlled areas in the promised land. Of course, tourists from America are welcome anywhere in Israel, Palestinian or Israeli territories, because we spend money and it's good for the economy. The economy really depends on tourism. During the COVID lockdown, my tour guide friend was just desperate. You know, a lot of his friends sent him money so he could survive during that time. And tourism is back up and running, so I hope he's doing well. So anyway, the Canaanite territory was from Sidon as far as Gaza. As you go toward Sodom and Amorah is the way that's pronounced in Hebrew. Sodom and Gomorrah. Admah, Zeboim, as far as Lasha. So these were the sons of Ham, according to their families, according to their languages, and in their lands and in their nations. So as we continue on in Genesis, we'll be reading a lot about, not a lot, but we'll be reading some about the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and Abraham's nephew Lot. So these were the sons of Ham, according to their families, according to their languages, lands, and in their nations. And children were born also to Shem, the middle child, I believe, the father of all the children of Ever, the brother of Japhet, the elder. And here's where we get the idea that Shem was the middle child and Japhet was the oldest son, because the antecedent of the brother is Shem. So it's talking about Shem, the brother of Japhet, the elder. So it clearly is saying to me that Japhet was the elder. But some people, and I don't know what the reason is, there might be a grammatical case for this, say that Shem was the elder brother whose brother's name was Japhet. You get what I'm saying there? That born also to Shem, the father of the children of Ever, the brother of Japhet, the other son of Noah, the elder, meaning Shem was the elder. The brother, Shem was the brother of Japhet, and Shem was the elder. So I don't know, that seems like awkward grammar to me. So, you know, some people say that Shem was the oldest, and I don't know how important that issue is, but I do want to talk about Ever. And so what do we got here? Verse 21. Ever. So my little finger pointer here is around the name Ever. And the Hebrew three-letter root is Ein, Beit, Resh, or Vet. Ein, Vet, Resh. This is the root word for the Hebrew language and the Hebrew people. So this guy, Ever, is the ancestor of the Jewish people, whom God would later choose to be his own people, and you know, his chosen race of people. So Ever is the ancestor, and the Hebrew language is called Yivrit. The Yivrit language, the Hebrew language, is, I would say it's the language that Ever spoke. Is the brother of Japhet the elder. Okay, the sons of Shem were Elam. So let's go over to the eastern part of the Middle East. Here's Elam. And that, I believe, later became Persia. Even in the book of Daniel, this territory, this region, is still called Elam. Later became Persia. Nowadays, it's Iran. And you might wonder, well, where did the name Iran came from? It was the brainchild of Adolf Hitler, because Iran is the Farsi, I believe, is the language that's spoken there. It's the Farsi word for Aryan, like the Aryan race. So during World War II, Hitler was busy sending his negotiators over here to the Middle East and stirring up hatred against the Jews. And the Iranians were some of the people that he kind of recruited to his side to help him with this final solution of wiping the Jews off the map. Interesting. Okay, so Elam, then we've got Ashur. Ashur's up here. So this guy would be the descendant of the Assyrian Empire. The Ashurim is how we talk about the Assyrians. Arpachshad, where is he? Arpachshad. I'm not seeing him, and I don't know if he's worth. Oh, Arpachshad, like the name of a city right here, Arpachshad. Lud, we got Lud. Don't see Lud. Hul, Geter. Don't see any of those guys. And Mash. Here's Mash. Not the Mobile Army Surgical Hospital, as in the TV show, but a guy's name. Arpachshad beget Salah, and Salah beget Ever. So this is where Ever came from. How many generations down? A couple, I guess. To Ever were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg. For in his days the earth was divided. We'll talk about that in a minute. And his brother's name was Yoktan. Peleg is the vision. And sometimes the names in the Bible are given prophetically about events that are going to happen in the future. Like Methuselah or Methuselah, his name means when he dies, it will be sent. Most people believe that's a reference to the flood, the coming of God's judgment in the year that Methuselah died. He may have died in the flood, or he may have died just before it. So, yeah, his name was given about prophetic events. Some people were named for events that were happening in their day, and that seems to be the case for Peleg, because it says in his days the earth was divided. Now, the word earth here in verse 25 is the word eretz in Hebrew, and it can mean a lot of things. It can mean the earth. Eretz is the name of the planet Earth. It can also be used to talk about the dry land parts as opposed to the ocean parts of the earth. And it's also a word, especially when it has a definite article like it does here, to talk about the promised land. Eretz Israel. Haaretz is Eretz Israel. So you have to let the context tell you whether it's talking about the planet, the dry land parts of the planet, or the Holy Land. And I don't know that the context really tells us anything about that, but something was divided. So we are talking about all these different people groups that are kind of scattered all over this part of the world. So it could be talking about that during the days of Peleg, that's when all the division of nations and cultures and races and stuff happened. The reds, the yellows, and the greens. That could be what this means. But there's one other theory that in a way I'm kind of fond of. And to talk to you about this theory, I'm going to pull up another map here that I have on my PowerPoint. So if you look at this map, I hope I didn't mess up. I think I might have messed up my PowerPoint. Let me go to this PowerPoint. Share that PowerPoint. It's not what I want. Okay. I do want my PowerPoint. Okay. Now, here's a kind of cartoon picture of the world. One of the questions that has always plagued people is, since the Bible tells us that mankind got its start in this territory right here, and you can see that the Western Hemisphere and the Eastern Hemisphere are divided by massive amounts of water. This is the Atlantic Ocean. How did the people get from here over to here? Well, maybe they were sailors. Maybe during the winter time, when this is the Arctic area froze over, they could walk over. There are all kinds of theories about how people got from here to here. But one of the theories is that if you look at these two hemispheres, the Western and the Eastern, and you look at this border, the Western border of the Eastern Hemisphere and the Eastern border of the Western Hemisphere, if you took your hands and kind of smushed them together, it looks like pieces of a puzzle that would fit together. Like this part of Africa would fit nicely right in here. And, all of this would kind of mash together and fit together. Like this seems to fit right here. So it could be that at one point in time, it was all joined together. And then during the days of Peleg, God did a massive geological change, shifting the tectonic plates, or, however he did it, and separated these continents. But there were already people living here before it was divided. And so when it was divided, they were kind of cut off from each other. But that would explain how you'd get populations here. Now, some people say that is too bizarre. That is it sounds non-scientific, doesn't it? But I mean, if God created the heavens and the earth by speaking them into existence in a moment of time, and if he slowed and sped up the angular velocity of the rotation of planet Earth, and I believe there's biblical evidence that he did that, how hard would it be for him to split the two continents to accomplish his purposes of populating the entire planet, the entire globe? And one of the things that would work in his favor would be, people would say, how did people get from here to here with an ocean in between? And, some who are open-minded would say, God must have done it in some spectacular way, either the way Bob just described it or some other miraculous way. Maybe he raptured some people over here and put them down over here. There's precedent for raptures in the Bible. So that may help us with Peleg, and it may not help us with Peleg. So that's a theory, and some, legitimate Bible scholars believe it. So that's kind of the story of Peleg. Then verse 26, we've got Yoktan beget Amodad, Shelef, Hazarmavet, and Yerath, Hadoram, Uzal, Dikla, Oval, Avimael, Sheba. So here's a Sheba down here. Is there another Sheba over here? Is there a yellow Sheba somewhere? I don't see it. Then we got Ophir, which is here. The gold of Ophir is supposed to be really high quality stuff. Havilah, which we talked about before. And there's a Havilah here in the yellow and a Havilah here in the green. So here's the Shemite Havilah, and here's the Hamite Havilah, and here's the Shemite Havilah. And those are connected with, or maybe connected with one of those rivers from the Garden of Eden. Okay. And Yovav, all these were the sons of Yoktan, and their dwelling place was from Mesha as you go toward Sephar, the mountain of the east. And are any of those places Sephar? I just don't know where to place those, or where this mountain of the east would be. So these were the sons of Shem according to their families, according to their languages, and in their lands according to their nations. These were the families of the sons of Noach according to their generations. In their nations, and from these nations were divided on the earth after the flood. And then we come to the Tower of Babel. Now, one of the things I want to point out is that we're getting close to the story of Abraham. That's going to begin in chapter 12 after we do the Tower of Babel stuff. Abraham apparently came from a place called Ur in the Chaldeans. So this is This is generally thought to be the origin of where Abraham, where his family came from. And I think he was a descendant of Arpachshad. I think there is a genealogy given of Abraham that traces him from Noah to Arpachshad. And I think also the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew also traces it back. I think that's the one that traces it back to, no, that one starts with Abraham. So the one in Luke, I think, traces Mary's genealogy back to Adam. So it would probably go through Noah to Arpachshad and then to Avram. Okay. So I think most Bible scholars place Ur down here where my little hand is kind of waving around in a circle, down here around the Persian Gulf. And then God calls him, and he and his family leave, traveling along the Euphrates River up here to a place called Haran, where the family settles down. One of his brothers passes away, then his dad passes away, and then Abraham heads south to the promised land. And there are disagreements about whether he was obedient or kind of disobedient, kind of a reluctant follower of God. You know, it says he was supposed to, some people say he was supposed to leave his family. Some people say that means that he was supposed to leave his homeland, which he did. So when we get to the story of Abraham, we'll talk about that. But there's another candidate for Ur up here around Haran. So Ur could possibly have been in Syria. But I think I think that's very much the minority view. And then when we get to the story of Abraham, we'll talk about those things. So yeah, let me give you a blessing from, we'll make this a Old Testament blessing, a blessing of the priestly, a blessing, the Kohanim, Baracha. And it is from Numbers chapter 6. So we'll do it first in Hebrew and then we'll do it in English. Yivrechecha Adonai vayishmarecha, Ya'er Adonai panav elecha vayuchanecha, Yisa Adonai panav elecha vayasem lecha shalom. And in English, that is, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance on you and give you peace. Now, when I prayed that in Hebrew, I used the substitute name for God's sacred name, Adonai, and we have talked about that tradition already. I know some people are offended if you say the sacred name. I think it is accurately pronounced Yahweh. But Numbers makes it, I think, fairly clear that that blessing is supposed to place 3 times the name of God on people. So I have a little bit of hesitation to put a substitute name on people when I bless them. But at the same time, some people are offended if they hear that name spoken. So I don't want to offend people either. So I did it the Adonai way today. So in Jesus' name, we'll bring it to a close. Hope to see you next time for Genesis chapter 11.